Imagine being torn from your family at dawn, shackled to strangers, and marched into the belly of a ship where darkness never ends. The air is thick with salt and fear. The cries of the terrified mix with the creaking of wood. Now, imagine this wasn't one story, but the fate of millions. Slavery wasn't confined to one nation, one people, or one era. It stretched across continents, across centuries. It built empires, toppled kingdoms, and left scars we still live with today. This is the story of the global history of slavery, spanning Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. A story not of numbers, but of human lives. Slavery is as old as civilization itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, captured soldiers and debtors became human property. Contracts written on clay tablets detail people being traded like livestock. The Egyptians forced tens of thousands to haul stone blocks beneath the desert sun, monuments rising on the agony of the voiceless. To build pyramids and temples that would outlast empires, they bent human beings into tools. Rome built its empire on the backs of slaves. They were everywhere. Gladiators spilling blood in the Colosseum, servants attending to senators, workers toiling in fields from Sicily to Gaul. Nearly 1 in 3 people in Rome may have lived in bondage, a society powered by chains. But here's the twist. Slavery in the ancient world wasn't always racial. A Roman slave could be a Greek philosopher, a Germanic warrior, or a North African farmer. Some were captured soldiers, others debtors. Some could even earn or buy freedom, rising to positions of wealth and influence. Yet beneath the rare stories of liberation lay millions whose lives were erased. And yet, every society echoed the same refrain: human beings reduced to property. The cries of the enslaved were whispered into stone, into soil, into history itself. Echoes that would never fully fade. But the ancient world was only the opening act. The stage was set for a system darker, larger, and far more brutal. One that would span oceans. Long before Europeans crossed the Atlantic, another trade was already booming. Beginning in the 7th century, the Arab slave trade stretched across North Africa, the Middle East, and deep into Asia. Caravans carried enslaved men, women, and children across the Sahara to markets in Cairo, Baghdad, and Istanbul. Thousands marched until their bodies collapsed in the desert heat, leaving bones scattered beneath the dunes. Others were forced onto wooden ships bound for India, Persia, and even China, their voices lost beneath the waves of the Indian Ocean. These captives were sold into households, farms, and armies. Many young boys were taken as soldiers, trained not just to obey, but to fight for the very people who enslaved them. Many young girls were forced into concubinage, their lives consumed by silence and coercion. The journey itself was merciless. Tens of thousands perished from thirst or exhaustion crossing the desert. On the ocean routes, storms and disease swept countless more into unmarked graves beneath the waters. Families were not just separated, they were scattered across continents. Historians estimate that over 17 million Africans were enslaved through the Arab trade over the centuries. 17 million lives, silenced, yet echoing still, hidden beneath the sands and waters of history. But if the desert was deadly, the ocean would become a graveyard. When European powers discovered the New World, they hungered for labor. Sugar, cotton, tobacco. These crops demanded endless workers. And so began one of the most horrific systems in history, the Atlantic Slave Trade. From the 16th to the 19th century, more than 12 million Africans were forced onto ships bound for the Americas. The Middle Passage was pure hell, bodies packed so tightly that movement was impossible, the stench of sweat and death choking the air. Disease swept through the holds like wildfire. Hunger gnawed. Whips cracked. 1 in 5 never survived the crossing. For those who did, the nightmare continued. Plantations in Brazil, the Caribbean, and the American South became prisons without walls. From dawn to dusk, men, women, and children labored under blistering sun. Families were ripped apart at auction blocks, identities erased with a hammer's strike. And yet, culture endured. Languages blended into Creole tongues. Songs, born from suffering, carried coded messages of hope and escape. Traditions smuggled across oceans survived in whispers, dances, and prayers. Even in chains, memory echoed. Meanwhile, Europe's cities glowed with wealth. The mansions of London, the palaces of Lisbon, the markets of Amsterdam, all of them stood on foundations of sugar, cotton, and human blood. The prosperity of an age was purchased by misery. This was not a chapter in history. It was a scar cut deep across continents. And the echoes of the Middle Passage still ripple today, in cultures shaped by survival and resistance. But here's the brutal irony. While enslaved people lived in chains, kings and merchants grew rich, and those echoes of injustice would not remain quiet forever. Slavery was not limited to Africa and the Atlantic. In India, millions of lower caste people lived in bondage, tied to the land in systems resembling slavery. The Mongols enslaved entire populations, dragging skilled workers and artisans across Eurasia to serve their empire. In the Americas, long before Columbus, some indigenous tribes practiced forms of enslavement. After European conquest, indigenous peoples were forced into mines and fields under the Spanish encomienda system, digging silver and gold that would reshape global economies. And in places like China, Korea, and Southeast Asia, war captives and debt slaves filled households and palaces. Different names, different cultures, but the same haunting truth. People stripped of freedom. Every continent carried the same echo, repeated in different tongues. But as slavery spread, so too did defiance. Because even in the darkest corners of history, people resisted. From the very beginning, enslaved people fought back. In Rome, Spartacus led a slave army that shook the empire to its core, defeating legion after legion before being crushed. His name became legend, an echo of rebellion. In the Caribbean, enslaved Africans rose again and again, setting fire to plantations in the dead of night. In Brazil, the Quiambos, communities of escaped slaves, formed hidden societies deep in the forests, defying empires that tried to hunt them down. But the greatest of these uprisings came in Haiti. In 1791, enslaved Haitians launched a revolution that defeated Napoleon's armies. They shattered the chains of bondage and founded the first free Black Republic. The sound of that victory echoed across the Atlantic, terrifying slaveholders, inspiring the enslaved. Revolts came at a terrible price. Whole communities were massacred, rebellions drowned in blood. Yet every act of resistance left a mark. Every cry for freedom became part of a chorus history could not silence. By the 19th century, abolition movements swept through Europe and the Americas. Britain outlawed the trade in 1807, its navy hunting down slave ships on the high seas. The United States ended slavery after the Civil War in 1865, though only after the country tore itself apart in the bloodiest conflict of its history. Brazil, the last of the Americas, abolished it in 1888 after centuries of struggle. But ending slavery on paper did not end its legacy. New forms of oppression emerged: segregation, sharecropping, colonial exploitation, systemic racism. Chains were replaced with invisible barriers. Freedoms promised were often freedoms denied. And even today, slavery has not vanished. It has changed its face. Tens of millions are still trapped in forced labor, child exploitation, and human trafficking worldwide. From sweatshops to fishing boats, echoes of bondage remain all around us. This is not just history. It is a haunting reminder, an echo that shapes our present. From the deserts of Africa to the plantations of the Americas, from the temples of India to the battlefields of Rome, slavery has scarred every continent. It is a history of cruelty, but also of survival, resistance, and resilience. A history whose voices refuse to be silenced. Because history never dies, it just echoes.